So I'm very pleased to introduce the next, and I suppose penultimate segment of the day's festivities, and glad to welcome Kimberley Mckay, class of '95, who will lead the discussion about MSP alumni in the private sector.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Come on down and take your seats. I know we're the last panel, but we'll try to keep it lively. So we have a bit of a smaller panel. So actually, I'm going to call myself a facilitator and not a moderator, because we're going to have a conversation. And so I'm going to also expect a little bit more participation from you in the audience as we go along. So in terms of structure, the first thing is I want to ask a couple of questions of you in the audience. This panel is actually about people, unlike the ones who just immediately preceded us, who actually took a different path, and we have spent the majority of our careers in a more corporate setting, but our commitment to social justice is the same. And so this is to talk about a little bit of a different way of getting to fulfill our shared mission. So the first question I have is, how many of you consider yourselves to be involved in social justice? Okay. Second, I see where your hands are, so I may come back and call on you, so just remember that, so don't duck down. The second question is, how many of you do not have social justice as part of the primary mission of your employment? Okay, fewer hands. So you're in the same boat that we are, basically. So I'm going to, again, ask some questions at the end, but I wanted to start with the definition of social justice. And in our conversation today, I have two, again, not panelists, folks who are sharing in this conversation, David Harris and Kirsten Scherer-Brannigan, who are going to share their thoughts in a moment. And I'm going to be a little bit of panelist and moderator, given the size of our panel. So I'm going to start with the definition of social justice. And I first went, as any good lawyer does, you go and you look it up and see what it says. So the first thing it says is, I went to the dictionary, which said it said that it is justice in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privilege within a society. Now, I said, I'm not sure I really like that. It's kind of high level. So I did what, I don't tell my kids I did this, but I actually went to Wikipedia. And I thought that I actually liked their definition a little bit better. And it was actually very much in line with what Senator Menendez said this morning. And in part it says, it's the process, and I have to read it because I want to make sure I don't misquote Wikipedia, right? The process of ensuring that individuals fulfill their societal roles and receive what is due from society, with emphasis on breaking barriers for social mobility, the creation of safety nets, and economic justice. And I actually like that definition a lot better because of the part that says to receive what is due from society. So it's not a giveaway. It's a right that people have to whatever aspect of social justice we're discussing. So that's the basis of social justice that we're going to talk about today. So again, I'm Kim Mckay. I have spent my entire career in corporate America, and I'm going to start by giving you some aspects of the ways in which I try to touch my community in a variety of different ways as a person, but then also as an employee. I work at Novartis Pharmaceuticals now, but I've worked in several companies since I graduated in '95. Now I've channeled my energies in really three areas. The first of which, I've actually been very, very involved in New Jersey in the foster care system, primarily through an organization called the Court-Appointed Special Advocate. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's actually a group of volunteers who advocate on behalf of children to the judge, essentially. They're like the judge's eyes and ears in the foster care system. It's completely separate and apart from social services or anything else. I make sure that all the rest of the people know what they need to do. And I've spent a lot of years involved in child welfare in that particular aspect. But also the second area has been more in mentoring. And that goes across the board in terms of mentoring children. I have a specific interest in mentoring women lawyers, young women, period, young minority lawyers as well. And then also, of course, our beloved MSP. And I have spent a lot of time working with MSP students. I have a lot of mentees. It's funny, I actually got an inquiry from your office this year, and it said, I don't know if it went back to you directly, saying, would you be willing to be an MSP mentor? And I was like, I have so many MSP mentees at this point, I just can't take any more on. But it's been a privilege to be able to do that. And so I actually enjoy that quite a bit, not just as students, but also as they progress in their careers. I actually have written a lot of recommendations for bar applications in many states in this country for MSP students who've either worked with me through the school or also at Novartis, in which at some point in time we've had interns from the MSP program. So the third area is actually more new, and that's really more in the political arena. I'll sort of leave it at that. I think we've all been motivated the last year or so to do some things differently, and so I channel a fair amount of my social justice energy in that regard. So I share those areas because I know that there are limited time, money, and resources that all of us have, and so I'm going to turn it over now to my panelists and ask you the question that, given the limits on your time, energy, and resources of various kinds, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you do and in what areas, and how you chose those areas of focus?
I guess I'll start it off. My name is Kirsten Shore-Brannigan, and I am a proud graduate of the class of '95, also an MSP. And before I tell you about myself, I have to also give a couple of shout outs and thank yous for people. I was saying to a couple of my classmates, I was a bit of a hot mess after that prior panel, listening to all the wonderful things that are going on at the law school. And I do try to stay connected and participate, but certainly being at an event like this does re-inspire me to be even more connected. So I probably would not be sitting here today if it wasn't for Dean Robinson. I came through the MSP as one of the economically disadvantaged white students. I grew up in Jersey City and didn't have the easiest childhood. My dad suffers from bipolar still to this day, so we've managed that since I was about 4 years old. And it wasn't an easy time, but definitely experiences that have helped me become the person I am, the lawyer I am today. And I remember when I walked into Dean Robinson's office, one of the things she said to me, it was 1992, and she said, so what do you think about this Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill thing? And that was how my journey into the law began. And little did I know at that time that I would become an employment lawyer, which is what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years. And also, thank you, Dean Chen, for teaching me how to somewhat understand the contract, but I still struggle a little bit there. And I actually still working at it, but and Professor Blum, thank you for explaining tax to someone who didn't think she'd understand tax. And of course, to Dean Padilla, my classmate and small section companion from Professor Slocum's small section property. Truly would not have gotten through first year without your camaraderie. So thank you for that. So my background, since I've graduated, I went on to be a summer associate at Wilentz, Goldman & Spitzer down in Woodbridge. I was then hired on a full-time basis there. I worked in their employment law group for about 10 years, and that was where I spent my first 10 years. And I know that obviously time as an associate at a large firm is difficult to incorporate aspects of the things that you hold dear and how you want to have those attributes be part of your life. But one of the things that I did was I was instrumental in getting Wilentz to utilize the minority student program, which I understand they're still participating with today, even though I've been gone for 10 years. So I'm very excited to be able to partake in that way. But I would suppose that my most meaningful social, the way that I've incorporated social justice into my career professionally probably started in the most meaningful way. And I was hoping Marilyn Askin would still be here, but I don't think, oh, there you are. Okay, good. So at a Rutgers alumni dinner one night, Marilyn said to me, and this was at the time where I was probably practicing almost 10 years, and remember when I came out of law school, everybody said, well, there are going to be more women partners at law firms because women are coming out of your graduating class at 50%, so it's a pipeline issue. And then I looked around 10 years later, and that really wasn't the case. And I saw many of my classmates dropping out of the profession, opting out, staying home to raise their kids, or just deciding it was too difficult. And I looked around to role models, and I really didn't see a lot of people that I wanted to emulate. So I remember Marilyn and I talking one night, and we were talking about the New Jersey Women Lawyers Association, which was originally formed in 1981 with Marilyn and her comrades. And she was, I believe, the leader for about 6 years. And she said, well, I was about to disband this organization because your generation doesn't seem to really care about these issues. And I said, well, I don't think that's the case. I just think we have slightly different issues, but we're definitely, they still exist. So she basically said we need a charismatic leader to take this on and breathe new life into it. So at that point, I had about 1,000 reasons not to do it, including 2 reasons, an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old, and but decided, if not me, then who? So I decided to start calling upon women throughout the state of New Jersey. If I litigated a case against them, it was like that commercial with the hair, and she calls her friend, and she calls her friend, and so on. And it was truly like that. I would call people, and I know Lowenstein Sandler, Linda Bennett, David's partner. I said, Linda, you don't know me, but this is what I'm trying to do here. And I would get responses like, I'm looking forward to working with you to affect radical change. And yes, we need this in New Jersey. We need a strong women's organization focused on all the issues that women lawyers are still struggling with. So I went about that task, and in the back of my mind, and I so was hoping he'd be here today, was Professor Slocum and his words to me that anytime you want to set about to affect change, you have to build an army. And those words stuck with me, and boy, did we build an army. And to this day, 10 years later, we've had our galas every year. We honor women throughout the state in private sector, in-house, public sector, nonprofit, and the judiciary. It's attended by about 700 people. We've now been in a position where we've raised money to give grants to organizations working on important social issues, as well as scholarships to all the law schools in New Jersey. We have 3 scholarship recipients every year. And it's been the way that that's been my passion. I definitely, like Marilyn, have the crusading gene. So I set about making that part of the way I was able to incorporate into my own practice. And now all of these women that we've rebuilt and breathed life into this organization are friends, are confidants, are people who send me business, are people that we have an amazing network of women lawyers in the state. And hopefully for the women that are coming up in the profession, there will be the kind of meaningful change, and we will see changes in the partnership levels at the law firms, and have the place at the table that so many women deserve. So that's probably the most significant way that I've incorporated that, the impact from this school and the ways that into my private practice.
Thank you. So, David, if you don't mind, so just in the spirit of conversation, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things from what you just said. So the first is, and I started with the definition of social justice because I think that oftentimes we think very narrowly about what that is. And whether it's from an environmental standpoint, a gender issue, it's criminal justice, all those things that we feel so passionate about, all fall within the social justice continuum. And what I love about the story that you just conveyed is that oftentimes it's a relay race. And you actually heard it actually with the MSP deans as well, which really struck me about that. Sometimes we think, oh God, I can't make an impact because I'm just so busy. I can't move the world. I can't boil the ocean. But sometimes it's just a matter of, I need to be the steward of this for some period of time, and then it moves on to someone else. And so, but in the end, you've got that army that Professor Slocum talked about, sort of one person at a time. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And David, I know you want to go, but I just wanted to say that that's something that we should also be keeping in mind.
Obviously, I'm the oldest person on this panel. I was admitted by Wade Henderson in 1975, and he told me I could choose to go to the day school or the night school. And I chose the night school because I was married, I had a son, and I thought I should keep my job. And so I went to the night school, and that was the first night school that Rutgers had since the 1950s. MSP really, the importance and how it has been sort of the guiding light of my career is that I came to know MSP, and you've heard this before, as a family. And we supported each other. And the year that Mckay was decided, I entered the moot court competition. I was taking a full-time load. I wasn't allowed to, but Linda Garbatio looked the other way. I was working full-time, and it was my son's first year in elementary school. But several MSP students approached me and asked me to enter the competition. I did, and I won the oral argument. Now that was don't clap. That was the year, 1978. That was the year Mckay was decided. This law school, the faculty, the administration, you would have thought I had argued before the Supreme Court. They put it on AP, they made it the front page of the law record, and they didn't stop talking about it, 20 years. Because it came at a time when minority students were being denigrated as unqualified. We were taking up these spaces of more qualified white students, deserving white students. The elite were being deprived of their seats in academia by the dregs of society, and we were black too. So my picture became the symbol for this law school for many years. And I have been eternally grateful. It changed my whole career. I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. Instead, I went to Lowenstein. And ever since I went to Lowenstein, I've been trying to be a civil rights lawyer to the best of my ability. Thanks be to God it was Lowenstein, because they had a tradition that actually encouraged me. I mean, they just let me do whatever I wanted to do. From the time I was like a third year, I was on boards, I was they just let me do pro bono cases for 2 years. Because that's what I wanted to do. So I was doing police brutality cases as a second year. I tried my first criminal case in federal court my first year after I was admitted to the bar. It was ridiculous. They don't do that anymore. But because I was allowed to do that, I thought I should do it all my life. And I have. But the thing of it is that besides the pro bono work, Lowenstein has had 5 partners from the minority student program. The work that we were able to do was sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, but we've had influence on corporations that didn't have any minority lawyers in their law departments, but they would after we had been there. There were, bar associations and other little networks of lawyers that had minority lawyers first with us, and then more came after us. And I think that almost every graduate of the program has the attitude that you see in the history of the minority student program itself. The road of opportunity begins as a narrow path. Our job is not only to walk that path with excellence and determination, but to make it wider and wider and wider. And there's room for everybody to come through. I learned that this law school was a place where everybody belonged. And that has been my guiding light ever since I've been here. And every time I turn around, the law school is back in my life. I got involved in the ACLU because Frank Askin asked me to. That there was just Ron Chin asked me to come back and teach. There's just I've been on 3 dean search committees, including the last one. So it's like the law school is a constant theme through my life, and so I can't say no. And I look for new ways to continue that theme in my life because it gives me joy. And I'm retired now. But I have continued, I've just turned that legal work into community work. And it's been a real joy. But it has been MSP that has been at the root of all of it.
That's amazing, and you certainly have driven a lot of what's happened at that firm, I know, for many, many years, so we thank you for that. There's one thing I did want to point out, based on what you said, that we often don't do, is ask or demand. You started out by saying you didn't know any different because you thought that this is how it's supposed to be, but you essentially you felt that you were entitled to bring that social justice work into your day-to-day work, and they accommodated you. But oftentimes people just don't ask. They don't expect it, and they're afraid to. And sometimes we get what I would call sort of an authenticity gap, where we're afraid to bring our whole selves to work. And I'll give an example of that in just a moment. I did want to mention, before I forget, because you guys mentioned your MSP, I actually have the distinction of being a second-generation MSP student because my father was in the class in 1976. I didn't want to forget that. But going back to the bring your whole selves to work, not to give a gross generalization, but most corporations are not places of great change and looking for places to put their time and their money to move the ball in terms of social justice. And so I know earlier in my career, I struggled with that. And I shared with them an example a few years ago where I was in a meeting and we were talking about diversity and inclusion. And so I sort of ultimately just was fed up, and I stood up and I said, we have to have a place where people can bring their whole selves to work. And they were like, what are you talking about? Of course, everyone can just be whoever they are here. I said, what did you do this weekend? And they were like, well, I went, boating or something. And I said, well, you know what? I was down in Newark protesting the Trayvon Martin murder. Like, what were you doing? And it took people by surprise. And it started a whole conversation about sort of the parallel lives that we have. And after that point, I realized that I needed to be more vocal and to ask and to demand what I thought was important and to bring my values to work. And there are many ways, certainly, to do that. And I know there are a couple of folks in the audience we're going to hopefully get get some insights on who work for corporations in different capacities. But they're oftentimes educating people about the things that are going on around them that they may not see. Is, I think, a key thing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about connecting your corporate life to your social justice life. Have you found that to be difficult in any ways? Sounds like yours, well, you just sort of demanded it from the beginning, so you maybe didn't have that problem. But if there are some challenges you've had, if you could share them with others in the audience who might actually be having those challenges right now, that would be helpful.
Well, David might have something more significant on the challenges there, but for me, I guess I kind of stopped at the first part of my career, which was working at a large firm, and then I decided that I was going to open my own law practice, which I never really envisioned being. I thought I was a big firm lawyer. I didn't see myself as a solo practitioner or having my own firm, but at that point in time when I was sort of going through a crisis of, can I be a good mom, can I be a good lawyer, can I be a good wife, how do I do it all? I was thinking about using my law degree to do other things. I was an employment lawyer, so maybe I'll work for a corporation in their HR department, or maybe I'll do this, and if I can get home and at least have dinner with my family, that would be good. And then something just clicked, and I remembered why I went to law school in the first place. I was sitting in a women's history class in college, hearing about all the ways that women were oppressed for many, many years, and thinking, wow, I can actually go to learn about the law, and how empowering would that be as a woman, and nobody could ever take that away from me. And so once I had that voice back in my head saying why you became a lawyer, I just said to myself, well, maybe you don't have to be a big firm lawyer. Maybe you can be your own boss. And so there's always the option of deciding to go outside of the system if you find the system challenging. And I can say that I find still to this day, because now I've been probably on my own for over 10 years, more than I was at a big firm, that I find it so much more rewarding to be able to, it's stressful, but it's also rewarding because not only do I take the work that I want to take, but I can take as many pro bono matters as I want. I can decide to help people who have been discriminated against who can't pay, without having to check with the management committee of the firm to see if it's okay. And it's very empowering to be able to make those decisions. So for me, that was certainly the path. And I decided I was so excited. I said, well, you know what? I think I want to have another baby too, because that would be fantastic. So I had another child. I have a 5-year-old now, and I had him at the age of 42. And that was a much more difficult labor experience than having my first 2 kids in my 30s, but it's been wonderful. And sometimes he comes to the office, sometimes my dog comes to the office, and it's definitely, for me, I think I would never want to go back to having to report to somebody. I would forever want to be my own boss and be the master of my own destiny, for better or worse. So that's the way that I've addressed it in my life.
I think rather than talk about my challenges, because my challenges were sort of self-created, because I kept pushing and pushing to see how far they would let me go before they really let me go. They never let me go. But how many people work for corporations in the audience here? One of the things that some of the corporations we worked for insisted on diverse pools. In other words, if you're going to pitch for their work, and I was always involved in pitches for litigation, but if you're going to pitch for their work, they wanted to see a diverse pool. They didn't want you walking in the door with all white men. In fact, you couldn't get in the door with all white men. And so when you're inside a corporation, you can actually push for that, as it doesn't always mean that the law firm that is most diverse or has diverse partners is going to get the work, but they get a shot at the work. And that's all you need. All you need is a shot at the work, because eventually you will get the work. And One of our graduates, Kevin Armstrong, I told him I was going to talk about him, but he's a general counsel for a hedge fund. So when you think greed, everybody thinks hedge funds, right? Yeah, that's funny. But Kevin, besides his charitable work and being on the board of trustees for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and he's a master of ceremony. He can't be here this weekend because he's master of ceremonies for Minnesota children, something or other, that is raising money, having their gala this weekend. But in terms of social justice and equality, Kevin raised $2 million for Obama's campaign twice. Now that is impactful. And one of the things about when you carry the social justice in your heart, we still need people who have political and economic power to push that agenda. And without that political and economic power, when folks get ready to cut you, nobody got your back. And so there are many people that graduated through this program who are in these corporations, they're in government agencies, and they're at the top or rising to the top. And we need to use our access to them as a means to tap into their social justice art and figure out the way they can help. Not just ask them for help, figure out the way that they can help, in which they can participate. Because that fabric needs to be knitted a little tighter for us to withstand and advance in this environment.
That's a really great point. And it's actually a great segue into really my next question, which I'm going to ask for some audience participation as well about how you may be leveraging your organizations in the interest of social justice. And I want you to think broadly about that, because we want to learn from each other today, not just from the three of us. We haven't cornered the market on good wisdom over here. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean. I think David just gave a couple of examples, but I work for a pharmaceutical company, and there are many ways in which I am able to influence, I'll say, some of the things that we do, from the philanthropic side, where we put our philanthropic dollars, which whether it's schools, whether it's from healthcare initiatives, how where the clinical trials are done, for example, in underserved communities, and whether or not we have a strategy for how to do that, so that the amazing healthcare, the tools that we're having, I'll say tools in a variety of ways, not just drugs, but other methodologies for combating disease, are actually available to underserved communities. That's something that can be done from inside, that is not typically thought of as sort of a social justice thing. Also, the mentoring programs that we have at my company are geared toward African Americans and Latinos. Actually, it used to be called the African American Latino Mentoring Program, to bring them in to have kids learn marketing strategies and how to do those things. So I say that just to give you a little bit of a sample of the ways in which we're probably involved in social justice without even thinking about it, but thinking that that's actually what we're doing. And so I was hoping that we might be able to have a couple of folks come up and talk a little bit about what they're doing in their organizations, law firms, corporations, unless our panelists want to add to that before they come up. Anything else to add? Leveraging. I love the idea of the law firms. That's a great point, because the corporations demanding that diversity is going to make a big difference. Can you come up? I'm sorry, I don't have a roving mic. You have to come up.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. I'm Professor Suzanne Kim. I'm on the law faculty, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank Marilyn and Kirsten for the work that you've done through the New Jersey Women Lawyers Association. I was honored to be the recipient of a grant from the New Jersey Women Lawyers Association to do leadership development and mentorship work for women in the legal profession. So thank you both so much.
Amazing. Great.
One of the things that, while we're waiting for, I think Abby's, are you coming up? Excellent. It's a classmate of mine. Go ahead.
I have my own firm in Miami, Florida, and I specialize in consumer law. And I had been mulling for many years, how do we empower the citizens of Miami to actually stand up to these debt collectors and so on. And I think having come here, I'm so inspired. And one of the things I'm going to do next week is I'm going to go speak to the administrative judge to start giving some clinics, because people do not know what their rights are, and so they're getting sued on cases that are outside of statute of limitations, that don't belong to them, and there are so many, especially at the county level, so many things that are going on that are really in violation of the law, but they have no idea. So I think being here has really inspired me to, next week, the first thing I'm going to do is meet with the administrative judge and ask to be allowed to give clinics at the different branch courthouses that we have. So thank you.
That's awesome. Great. Thanks, Abby.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to this panel. I think this is super important, and not just because I'm in private practice. I'm Cliff Dawkins, graduate of Rutgers Law, 2015, also MSP Alumni. I love the program, and I love today. This has been amazing so far. In terms of, I guess, takeaways for me as a young attorney, and seeing your trajectories, which are all so inspiring, I think, too, it's important that young associates understand we can get involved now, immediately. Some things that I do are sit on local community boards. I sit on the board of directors for the Urban League of Morris County. But more, I guess, close to the heart right now is we've actually put together a group called the Rutgers University Black Lawyers Alumni Network. And the group works in connection with the law school to bring programs, do focus groups, talk about issues, and figure out ways that we can support and supplement the work that's being done by amazing institutions like MSP. And so this is also a shameless plug for all the young attorneys in the room and young of heart that might want to get involved with Rublon. Again, thank you so much for all of your work, and thank you for giving us the blueprint and blazing the trail for us to follow. Thanks.
Thank you.
So since we're giving shameless plugs, my name is Leland Mcgee. I am a state administrative law judge. And Oliver admitted me into the program, class of '82. My shameless plug is that we struggle over at the New Jersey State Office of Administrative Law, which is right over there, to get students to come and intern. The administrative law class that's given is generally a federal administrative law class, and so people know very little about what state administrative law judges do. And it touches the very heart of everything that goes on in the state. Anything that's regulated by the state of New Jersey has a due process mechanism, and that's what administrative law judges handle. And so I call on the dean periodically to get a chance to come in and talk to students about coming in to be interns. It may not be a social justice issues per se. However, we need more people, more compassionate people handling welfare cases. Mm-hmm. We need more compassionate people handling Medicaid cases.
That's social justice to me.
Yeah. We do a ton of special education cases. So there is a lot of work to be done if students come in and get some exposure, opportunity, and experience. Thank you. Thank you all for this talk.
Thank you.
And just also a word about what young lawyers can do. I know that when I was coming up through the ranks at Wilentz, one of the things that I did was I participated in the summer associate program as a mentor. So by the time I was about a third year associate, I had a mentor. And from there, I was then put on the hiring committee, and I had an advisee. And I was also very active in going on campus and trying to recruit. And there are some people that are still there that are very successful, have come through MSP, and say, oh, if it wasn't for you hiring me or calling me back, I never would have had this job, things like that. So whatever ways you can get involved in your firm life or the businesses that you work with, where you can potentially impact somebody's individual job experience where someone else may not give them the benefit of the doubt, whereas you might, and then therefore the doors open, and then they'll go on and flourish at that point.
I'm Oliver Quinn. First of all, I was the director of the Minority Student Program when David won the moot court competition, and I unabashedly used that because, that was like a secret weapon when they were coming at me. Our students were doing fine, but they didn't have the kind of notoriety that him winning the moot court competition did. So if you're wondering who was plastering your picture all over the place, it was me. And I would do it again. It was very helpful. I spent 14 years at Prudential. Prudential is an interesting company because they do have a very strong social conscience, and they put resources behind it. So as an executive, if I was on a board, I served on the WBGO board, Jazz 88, and Prudential's attitude was, if you're on the board, then we will support you. So we didn't have to kind of sneak out of the building to go to meetings or anything like that. You could bring the resources of the enterprise to whatever organization you were involved with. One of my colleagues from Prudential is now on the board at New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and he's chairing the finance committee and has brought all of that institutional knowledge to this not-for-profit to help raise its game in terms of financial management. The value of being inside is that you can learn about things that you would not otherwise know. So one year, I happened to be sitting in a meeting that was talking about summer interns and realized that they weren't talking about MSP students. And so I asked why, and it turned out that the previous year, they'd had a bad experience. They had students who came as interns who hadn't been prepped properly and didn't really take advantage of the opportunity. The law department's response was, well, we'll just go to Seton Hall or wherever. But because I was inside, I was able to arrange a meeting between the dean and the general counsel, and we straightened things out. And for a couple of years, I would come over to the law school and meet with the summer interns before they started it, just to talk to them about the environment that they were going to be walking into, what the expectations were of them, what types of experiences they should expect, and it made it more meaningful for both sides. But that relationship would have ended, and nobody would have even known why, but for somebody with connections to the law school being in the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
I will say that after I had been interviewed, after I won the moot court competition, Oliver came up to me and said, would you be willing to tell them that you were admitted through MSP? And I thought, well, of course. So I went back, and that became like a long part of the article, because I didn't think of it then, I would think of it now, is that one of the tricks, right? One of the tricks is to take what are perceived to be highly achieving minority people and tell them they're different. Instead of looking at them as part of a group of excellent students who happen to have maybe different types of expertise. And so one time, I represented this client, and we were actually flying to Israel. And we had taken the car through Manhattan, and the client said to me, this was, back in the day when if you went, through the tunnel, you came out and there were all these people out there that were wanting to wash your windows and stuff. So, and sell you drugs and whatever else. And so the client said to me, now keep in mind, I was the lawyer this client went to when his ass was really in trouble. He says to me, he says, look at all those people out there. Don't they understand that they represent their people? And I looked at him and I said, Isaac, how come when you look at me, you don't think I represent my people? And he shut up. But that is something that when you are in these corporations or you're in any predominantly white institution, and I had predominantly white clients, they will look at you and look right past you. But if you screw up, if you fail, if you write a bad memo or you lose a case, then they look right at you, yeah, that was a mistake. And that's what you face. I mean, the description, there have been so many studies about how, and the one I like the best, well, not like the best, but they did a memo of, they made it up. They did a memo that purportedly came from a third-year associate, and it had mistakes in it. Every memo had the same kind and number of mistakes, and they gave it to law firm partners throughout the country. They told half the law firm partners that the associate was black. They told the other half the associate was white. The law firm partners, and this was diverse partners, the partners who read the white memo found fewer mistakes and viewed them less harshly. The partners who read the black memo found more mistakes than there actually were and said stuff like, I can't believe she went to NYU. We got to get this guy out of here. I mean, stuff like that. So they were immediately prepared to look at the mistakes as damning the black associates and overlook the mistakes of the white associates. And that's what you face in a white institution. Now, whether it's fair or not, that's what you face. So you have to be prepared to face that and to constantly work to make the road wider. And you will have allies, but you need to recognize who your allies are and who your enemies are.
Thank you. Well, we only have time for one more quick question, and this is sort of to close it out. I'm going to ask each of you to give me an idea of an example that was very poignant for you that motivates you to continue to do what you do. I'll start to give you a minute to think about that. I was reminded when I came to this room that some of my social justice roots actually are in this very room. At the time I was in Rutgers Law School, the president of the university said some very controversial remarks, and we all protested in this very room. And I'm still protesting in the Women's March and all those kind of things many, many years later. But I also wanted to just highlight one example of why I am continue to be empowered by addressing social justice issues. I actually recently was, for the first time, actually appointed to a criminal appeal for the state of New Jersey, and I have never litigated. I mean, being a clerk was as close as I've come to a courtroom, right? So I called them up and I said, I'm sorry, you must have made a mistake. This is Kim Banks Mckay. I don't do this stuff. And they said, oh, actually the exact words were, did you go to law school? And I said, yes. They said, well, the judge thinks that you're ready to do this case. So to make a long story short, I ended up doing this pro bono case, which was really one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire career. I actually wrote about it, I was won an award recently, and they asked me to write about my most rewarding experience of the last 18 months, and I actually wrote about my pro bono criminal appeal case in the municipal court of Newark. And the reason is because I really felt like I changed somebody's life, literally, that day. And all the corporate stuff in the world is never going to give me that feeling. So I just wanted to share that story with you. And I'll turn it over to my co-panelists if they have an idea. Although I have to tell you, that was a pretty poignant moment about the work that you're doing right here just a moment ago. But go ahead.
Do we have time? Okay. Well, I don't even know that I have one story. I think for me, because I do work in the area of employment discrimination and harassment, a lot of work that I do is more in the neutral space. Right now I do a lot of investigations about harassment discrimination. I do lots of training, which I was actually talking to Professor Godsill about to see if maybe we can partner on some implicit bias training. But I would say just the role as advocate for me has always been the most special role as a lawyer, no matter, I'm also an arbitrator with the American Arbitration Association, so it's kind of fun to decide the cases and be a quasi-judge in that respect. But I would say the role as advocate in all of my cases, whether it's dealing with female executives that have been discriminated against or people of color that have been discriminated against, all sorts of different areas of discrimination, just that sense of helping somebody navigate one of the most difficult times of their life, and the sense of profound joy that I have to be able to help in that process. And a lot of people I know that have kids that are thinking about what they're doing and would they want to go to law school, and so many of my friends in the law say, oh God, I hope not. And I always talk to my kids about it, although I have a 15 and a 13-year-old, and they just look at me and say, oh Mom, so we could do what you do. You're always on the phone and you're always reading, and we don't want to do that kind of thing. But I'm not giving up. But I think that for me, it's just that profound role as advocate and helping somebody who's been mistreated by an employer, and that would be mine.
Thank you.
I guess early on in my career, I was assigned this case. Actually, I didn't get the assignment. Somebody in the tax department got the assignment to represent this fellow on a criminal appeal from municipal court. I met with him, and he said that the judge declared him guilty and he never pled guilty, and the judge sentenced him. Of course, I didn't believe him. That doesn't happen. So I got the transcript, and sure enough, the judge saw him and said, okay, you're guilty, and sentenced him. I couldn't believe it. So I handled the appeal, and of course it was reversed, and they didn't even bother with it after that. They dismissed the case. But it was one of those examples where you see the starkest form of injustice. Not a coerced confession, not a trick confession. Just don't even bother with it, you're guilty.
Wow.
And that sort of set me on a path of cynicism towards the judiciary that lasted, I think, till today.
Oh, thank you. Well, please join me in thanking my panel.
Let me thank again our three illustrious alumni, Kimberley Banks Mckay, Kirsten Shorey Brannigan, and David Harris, and all the alumni, Abby, Leland, Oliver, who spoke. I hope all of you saw a lot of yourselves when this panel is going on, because this is you. And this is certainly those of us who are still at the law school. Remember that you are finding ways to promote social justice in whatever your job title is. So thank you very much.